The numbers are astounding when it comes to domestic violence. An average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every single minute. And this equates to more than 10 million abuse victims annually. Millions of Americans live in daily silent fear within their own homes. And in addition, every year, millions of children, yeah, they're exposed to domestic violence. And domestic violence incidents, they affect every person within a home and can have long lasting negative effects, of course, on children's emotional well-being and social and academic functioning as well. So how can we as a society bring those sobering numbers down? So let's bring in our panel to talk about this right now. We have Volusia County Councilman Matt Reinhart from District 2. Councilman, welcome back to In Focus. And we also have Jody Domingue, the Chief Operating Officer of One More Child in Lakeland. You two, thank you so much for joining us with this really important conversation this week on In Focus. And Councilman Reinhart, if I may start with you here, let's look at it from the county level perspective. How pervasive is domestic violence? I'm wondering if the stats we hear are much lower than what's really happening.
So the statistics here in Volusia County, I also, in addition to being on county council, I sit on the Domestic Abuse Council for Volusia County. And the numbers here show Volusia County is number 4 in the state for domestic violence. So that was such an alarming number that I felt we have to do something in more than just education. We have to find a way to lower those numbers in any way possible.
So as a lawmaker then, Councilman, what can you do then? What are these conversations you're having to for us to see some action?
So we were discussing this issue. We looked at knowing our numbers are so high. Coincidentally, we were reading an article in the newspaper from the state of Tennessee that had alarming numbers as well. But also there was an incident of an off-duty sheriff's deputy in Robinson County, Tennessee, who was abused to the level he actually her ex-boyfriend had killed her. So they created a law that required anyone convicted more than once to register on this domestic violence database. And knowing that here in the county, we make ordinances, not necessarily laws. We've already kind of passed the threshold of what we could ask our state legislature to do for this year. But I didn't want to sit on my hands. I wanted to be able to find a way to, at least in Volusia County, try to address this as soon as possible. So I asked my colleagues on the council if they would entertain the idea of implementing something similar just here in Volusia County, as we oversee just that, creating an ordinance that would require anybody convicted of domestic violence, and therefore they had to register. This kind of brings a transparency to it. Potential partners could see without having to go through an entire criminal history of an individual or to pay for something, would have to go to the clerk's office to obtain that and then try to, look through the entire criminal history for those types of offenses. But also for those individuals that, we have a large elderly population here in Volusia County as well. And oftentimes we bring individuals in to the homes to take care of our loved ones. And this would be just another resource to find out if they have that type of behavior in their history.
So, we can talk a lot about empathizing with the survivors, but Jody, to you, are we then doing enough in our communities to help these victims, these survivors of domestic abuse? What is the number one need right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Allison. And when we're talking about populations that have been victimized from domestic violence, we have to consider that for the most part, if we're asking them to exit their situation, or we're prompting them, or they are at that point, that window of change to exit, that then what they are required to successfully and safely do so is resources. because typically when you have someone who's been abused by intimate partner violence or domestic violence, part of that grooming process is that that individual makes sure that the person that they're abusing is dependent solely on them financially, emotionally, for safety outside the relationship, shelter, all of these basic things. And so when we're working with someone with that level of abuse and we're considering an exit strategy, we've got to consider everything from immediate housing that is protective, that is undisclosed, that keeps that person safe, all the way up into that transition point. I would say we as a society have done a lot better in the space of crisis response, getting that person out immediately. Law enforcement has made incredible strides when it comes to training and recognizing and an empathetic, trauma-centered, victim-centered approach. We can place that person in emergency crisis shelter. From there is where we need to do work as a community and as a society, because from there, we want to take that individual who's been so dependent on this victimizer to then be able to build the resources necessary that they can stand on their own 2 feet. And for many of these victims that we're talking about, these numbers that we're talking about, they also come along with children. And so those children are also dependent for very specific needs. And so what we're seeing is just a multitude of needs across the spectrum, from needing, again, that immediate assistance, economic mobility and employment, healing, right? Mental health healing, mentorship, and then all the way where you can take this individual where they can live a self-sustaining, self-sufficient life, where they can no longer be vulnerable again to go back into the cycle, because they ended up in that cycle because of vulnerabilities that they had in the first place. Typically, when they exit, they still have those vulnerabilities.
And
so it's
Jody,
only a minute before they fall back in.
Indeed. And you mentioned the kiddos, just imagine this toxicity, so these kids, Jody, they're so vulnerable, and the needs for support, they've got to be a lot different. Yeah. So expound on that.
Yeah. So the children who experience domestic violence and intimate partner abuse, it is profound, the amount of trauma that impacts them from that situation. And so those children need safe shelter. And at One More Child, our entire mission is to provide services to vulnerable children and struggling families. And so when those children are cared for, they need a holistic approach. They need a approach that's going to understand the mental healing that comes along with that, but also the safety that's required for them. Again, they are going to, be raised in those vulnerabilities. We want them to not have those vulnerabilities as they're growing up, so they're not, in that perpetual cycle as they're adults as well.
And Councilman Reinhardt, talk to me then about the law enforcement side of this. Domestic violence calls are probably the most dangerous ones that come in, or at least, have the great amount of unknowns. So how does law enforcement deal with that? What are the latest strategies?
So, I mean, that's a great question. Also, I probably defer. I know that Sheriff Chitwood, who we have a great relationship with, in the sheriff's office, because we oversee the unincorporated parts of Volusia County, not so much the municipalities, but every law enforcement agency. It is by far probably the number one most concerning situation to roll up on as a law enforcement officer. My experience prior to council was 30 years in corrections, and I can tell you that I have not seen much of a drop off here in Volusia with respect to those that were incarcerated for those offenses. Now, we have implemented things on our side, what we can deal with from the correction side, as far as anger management, domestic violence classes and whatnot, that we can at least try to find out the root cause for this before those individuals are released back into society and repeat those offenses again.
So, Councilman Reinhardt, you recently made a motion to explore the possibility of creating a domestic violence registry in Volusia County. And this has me thinking of Dexter's Law you passed this year, which puts the animal abusers' names right out there for everybody to see for all of time. So tell me more about your effort.
Well, thank you, Allison. what we tried to do was something like the state of Tennessee had done with respect to a statewide registry, knowing that we could not get that passed through our state legislature this year because every bill has already been filed and we've already passed that threshold. Wanted to do, or I wanted to do something at the county level in the interim. I didn't want to just sit back and not do anything, waiting for the next year. So I asked council to entertain the idea of have staff bringing back more information on how we could implement something at a local level. Remembering back, you made the reference to the animal abuse law that actually started locally, and Debbie Dorino, who kind of spearheaded that movement, she came to us and asked if we could make that change that threshold from 10 years to a lifetime. So, and then therefore became at the state level. So we just want to show the state how serious we are about this, and hopefully other counties will take it on as well. We will discuss this at a future council meeting. I know that they'll bring back, staff will bring back a couple different options. I know that financial is a concern. However, with any registry, that can be implemented at the court level. So it's going to take that collaboration with the court system to find out if we need to assess a fee in order to offset the cost of such registry. But the actual registry would take place with our local clerk's office, and we would get the information from them. Our IT team could possibly develop that system. But, you know, some of the questions that were asked, you know, well, we can find out that information on their criminal history. What this does is create, this registry creates a little more transparency, a little easier to navigate for individuals to try to get information about potential partners, to see if there is any type of current of history with that, and hopefully prevent something from happening again.
Indeed. And Jody, weigh in here, if you will. So when we talk about creating awareness, does something like domestic violence registry work? It sounds like it's akin to the sex offender database, which we know people use all the time to see how close any offenders might be to them and their kids. So would this have the same effect?
I think it would, Allison. I think obviously we don't know as far as deterrent of behavior. That would be an interesting statistic I would love to see as we get this thing up and going. But I do think it will create some awareness for those who are engaging in relationships. People are going to check social media now and then this registry, which is very good. I think long term, the goal, what we would love to see, I think this law sounds amazing. I think I'd love if we didn't have to have one, right? So I would love if we did more upstream prevention work when it came to domestic violence. But obviously we have to deal with those who are already inundated in the cycle. And I do think that this is a tool in the toolbox that will create additional awareness and then help those who could maybe potentially avoid an abuser. I think that's a beautiful thing.
And Jody, you mentioned behavior. Is there actual shame for a domestic abuser? I certainly wouldn't want to be tagged with that label, but for those that are capable of such atrocities, does a label like that even faze them? Does it bother them? Do they even care?
I think for some, Allison, you have abusers who are on every end of the spectrum, right? You have abusers who were raised in cyclical poverty and trauma. This is all they've seen, and they have zero coping skills, and they are just living in a cycle. And I think for those abusers, yes, you may create some awareness. You may create some shame attached to that would hopefully, research is kind of mixed on that, but maybe break that cycle. Obviously, too, you have the other end of the spectrum where some of these abusers have very deep in mental health issues. And when you're dealing with someone who might have a narcissistic personality or something like that, it's going to be less likely, to be honest with you, but you're at least going to segment some out, a vast majority who are doing it because it's what they've seen. It's what they've experienced growing up.
And Councilman, to wrap up this block, I do want to go back to our children. The law enforcement response to any situation, I assume, has to be nuanced because especially for kids, big law enforcement guys breaking down doors and coming in yelling orders, that has to be terrifying for these little ones. Is there any way to minimize the trauma of that scenario, Councilman, that we know is happening out there in our communities?
That is an awesome question. You know what I left out before, and what really started this is I've already asked her permission. My daughter went through a situation where she was abused by her ex-boyfriend, and my grandchildren were there at the house when law enforcement showed up. And I have to say, I have to give credit where it's due. I can't speak for every agency that's out there, but I have to say that the training that law enforcement agencies are receiving with respect to domestic violence and how they respond to those situations, especially when children are involved, has come a long way. And how they dealt with my grandsons was phenomenal as far as trying to minimize the effect as much as possible and how much they're exposed to.
So to both of you, I want to talk solutions in our final block here. Councilman, how do we make a positive impact moving forward?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that implementing this brings that transparency that we spoke about, but it also helps minimize possibly the amount of individuals that are exposed to that type of behavior if they're able to find out more about a potential partner. But also, what we're doing with those individuals that were arrested for it, how we deal with those individuals that are incarcerated for those offenses. To how do we get them as far as the thing that they would, find out the root cause. Why are they like that? Why did they feel that was the need to take it to that level, and hopefully to be able to stop that from happening again in the future? And again, continuing to train our law enforcement, continuing to work with our court system and our state attorney's offices.
Indeed, to detect and react accordingly.
Yes.
Indeed. And Jody, to you, let's talk solutions with you. In 2026 here, what are some of the innovative or the latest ways that we're addressing this and tackling this just disgusting issue?
Yeah, Allison, I think, again, as I mentioned before, going upstream is key, right? And that's one of our major things that we focus on at One More Child is prevention and intervention and policy change. And so when we're talking about prevention, we're talking about creating programs where there's awareness around red flags, there's awareness around grooming techniques, there's also mentorship involved, right? Especially for our young men. We know prevalence wise, men usually are higher rates of abusers. So great programming is out there. Evidence-based programming is out there that helps reduce the rate in which these type of behaviors are happening. We just really got to get upstream and then start early. We got to get to our kids who are in elementary schools, middle schools, and we got to get those prevention programs in there.
Well, Jody and Councilman, thank you so much for your candid conversation, and we look forward to hopefully next year's conversation we can get these stats down, with some innovation, and with maybe this registry, will be in place before we know it, and we'll be following this as we journey through together. So y'all, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. To keep up with important issues impacting our communities and hear more conversations with the people who are shaping the future, subscribe to our channel. You can also download our app or find Spectrum News on your TV for balanced, in-depth political coverage and more.